A very warm good evening, South Africa, and welcome to Sunday Live right here on SABC 1. I am your host, Dumelo Mototwane. Now, with only 31 days into 2016, it's been no secret that the country has been reeling from recent racist social media outspats that have been, we've seen quite a number of individuals with the likes of real estate agent Penny Sparrow and economist Chris Hart, as well as, media personality Gareth Cliff, making headlines almost daily about their comments on social media. Now, the Human Rights Commission has confirmed that it is currently processing several complaints relating to racism and, of course, remarks made online, mostly, of course, on Twitter and on Facebook. Now, one would have thought that the issue of racism was solved and discussed after democracy back in 1994, even with Section 9 of the Constitution of South Africa supporting this, in that everyone is equal before the law and is protected against discrimination on racial grounds. Now, a poll question to you this evening is, do young people have what it takes to end racism in South Africa? You can SMS yes or no to the number 34065. Alternatively, you can join our conversation on social media. On Facebook, we are Sunday Live on SABC1. You can tweet at Sunday Live SABC1 or tweet me personally at @T_Mututwane and hashtag Sunday Live SA. Also, I look forward to hearing from you. You can call me live in studio on 011-714-8080. Now, joining us in studio tonight, of course, to take this conversation even further, we're joined by senior political journalist, Mr. Pete Rambedi. We're also joined by Robin Forster, who's an adoptive mother. And in our Cape Town studios, we're joined by a technology advocate, Russell Luck. Thank you so much to all of you for joining me. And also not forgetting that we're also joined by a studio audience here to also engage and comment on the topic that we have tonight. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining the conversation. You can also be a part of the conversation, of course, by just engaging telephonically or on social media. Pete, let me start with you because you are a political, journalist. And I mentioned in my intro that in the past 31 days alone, there were so many reports, whether it's TV, whether it's online, in print, around, the debates of racism in the country. Do you think that this has been an ongoing issue in the country? Is it something that we've just swept under the carpet, or was it an outburst of something that was going to happen eventually?
Look, I think from where I'm sitting, this thing has been there. It's not, racism is not new. And I wouldn't say it was being swept under the carpet. I think black people for a long time did not have an opportunity. They were actually muted until the introduction of social media, which is your Twitter and Facebook. We had what I would call gatekeeping. Whenever there were incidences of racism, they had to write letters to the newspapers and the media. And I think, there were people there who were deliberately trying to, stopping those things from being published. Mm-hmm. And now, because they've got, they've got control over what they want to say, nobody can edit their views on racism, so they are free to express themselves. Mm. So, but before I go further, I just want to give you the context to what my answer is going to be. I think for a long time, we had racial incidences of racism. And I remember in 2000, mm-hmm. former President Thabo Mbeki actually hit it in the nail when he said that, racism manifested itself mm-hmm. in various ways. He said there was the ideological aspect of it and the socio-economic aspect of it. The ideological one, spoke to battles of ideas, right, where people would debate racism. But the socio-economic one spoke to, the socio-economic, political, and cultural power relations mm-hmm. of domination of and discrimination of the victims of racism. I think for a long time, we had been debating the first aspect of racism, which is the ideological. We would have people debating whether or not white people are born racists, right, or whether they learn racism, and then they neglected the core one, which has been the social and economic one. Yep. Because now you're talking about lack of economic transformation. You're talking about
land distribution exactly. of wealth, and so
this
forth.
is the core one, because currently it's defining black people as inherently incompetent.
Let me involve Robin there because we need to, also include her and Russell. Robin, you wrote an open letter, I understand, directing it to Penny Sparrow after she made her comments on social media. Why did you feel the need to write an open letter in public expressing your views as a white woman in South Africa?
I think, Tamela, I wrote it in two capacities. One is, yes, as a white woman, but also I'm an adoptive mom. I'm fortunate enough to have a biological son who is 8, and an adopted daughter who is 3, and one of my children is white and one of my children is black. And I think my experience of living in South Africa has been very much defined by how can I create a place for my children that will be a safe space for them, in the sense of where they can be able to live their lives and tell their stories and not be in a situation where they find that people are reacting to the color of their skin before they respond to them as people. So for me, and it's interesting because I live in Johannesburg. I have had a very positive experience of being a transracial adoptive family in South Africa. And to a large extent, people have been extremely warm and very welcoming to our family and wonderful in the way that they have welcomed us in as a different family. I think we're seeing more and more multicultural, multiracial families in South Africa. But suddenly, in January, there was that feeling of maybe my daughter isn't safe. Maybe when she steps outside of the safe little world where she is, where people are seeing her as a person, maybe other people will define her in a way that will require them to ask her to get out of a swimming pool because it's out of decency for other people. Right. And for me, there was that sense of that is not okay going forwards. We do need to engage with deep issues in people's stories. We need to uncover why we made the mistakes in the past. We need to hear, certainly we need to hear those stories that have been muzzled. And we need to look at our children to be the ones who are going to take us forward and to be the ones that are no longer defined by the same things that we generationally were defined by as South Africans.
All righty then, well, let's leave our conversation at that. I'd like to encourage you to give me a call on 011-714-8080. I'll be taking your calls when we come back, also engaging with our audience members as well as technology advocate Russell Luck to tell us more about why, what impact rather has social media had on exposing, of course, racial comments, of course, in South Africa. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Live right here on SABC 1. You can give me a call on 011-714-8080 as we discuss racism in the country and asking you the question, do you think that young people have what it takes to end racism in South Africa? Well, we're joined by our guest in Cape Town. Russell, thank you so much for joining us once more. Let's talk about the role and impact that social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have played with the recent spate of racial remarks, of course, in the country.
Hi, Tamela. Look, social media has been used in a number of ways. Firstly, to propagate racism, as well as to curtail racism. And the two interesting cases were, of course, Penny Sparrow, Justine van Vuren, and also the Chris Hart case. Those are all cases where racist and provocative statements were made. And then the public managed to voice their disapproval and their disgust for those statements on social media. But then in other cases, such as the de Klerk case, which happened at the Queen's Plate, social media was used to actually track down the identity of Justine de Klerk and bring it to book. So, you see social media can be used in a number of ways, not only to kind of propagate racism, but also to prevent it and curtail it.
And is there social media, law to, of course, also control this? I suppose my question is, what do social media platforms, what are they able to do to ensure that, they bring those to book, perhaps they even, expose them, besides, of course, people calling out racist and, their comments on social media? Is there anything that the owners, the platforms itself, do they have a law that regulates all these conversations online?
Yes and no. So all your social media platforms do have a complaints policy, and the complaints policy all address things like offensive material, bullying, online racism, etc. But they're quite slow, and also the relief that you get is quite shallow, in the sense of if someone says something which is racist, in particularly in South Africa, where our fundamental human right is dignity, which is different to, say, the United States, where their right is the freedom of speech. In South Africa, we protect dignity, and if someone kind of uses racism, which goes to the heart of your dignity, you'd want to kind of take that kind of behavior and cut that out of society, because it's a social cancer. And so just using a complaints policy on Facebook and Twitter, etc., isn't sufficient. And there's a whole ambit of laws that we can use in South Africa, where the perpetrator is also South African, to bring them to book and take the necessary action against them.
Well, let me take it back to our audience members. Thank you so much once more for joining us. What are your comments surrounding, the last 31 days that the country has had to witness, of course, racial comments, debates on social media around, white privilege and, black underprivilege and so forth? Yes? Anyone? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Kirsty. I run a Facebook page called the White Privilege Project. White people don't want to engage in the discussions on race. And for the most part, there's a lot of anger, and then there's denial, and then there's guilt. And people don't want to talk about it. So it's quite difficult, in actual fact.
Interesting. Anyone else like to comment?
Yeah, my name is Bongani. I'm a curator. So I just want to maybe mention two things that I tend to differ a little bit about what Peter said there, that the ideological level of racism has been addressed. I really believe that it has been touched on, but not totally addressed. I mean, our definition of racism in South Africa is still very limited. We're still looking at racism in terms of scientific racism, the tone of our skin, that my skin is darker than my colleague here. I don't think we're here to talk about that. We want to talk about how racism came about in South Africa and the colonialism that came with racism. Racism came as a result of colonialism that happened in South Africa and in the whole of other countries. So I just want us to look at what racism is with connection to power, knowledge and being. That there are people who are dispossessed of land, of power, of resources. So if we want to address racism, let's look at also the tangible effects of racism. What did racism do to who? Then vice versa. How can we reverse that? I think because if we're going to sit here and talk about scientific racism, I think it's going to be very shallow.
Well, thank you so much. I want to ask another question to anyone else who would like to also comment, please. Do you think that young people have what it takes to end racism in the country? I mean, these are young people who've come out saying, well, I wasn't born, in apartheid. I don't understand why I'm paying for my ancestors' sins as far as my white race is concerned. They're also, in multiracial schools in South Africa, so one would assume they're exposed to different cultures and races. So do you think that they have what it takes to end racism?
Yes, I think we do, but I think we need to do it the old-fashioned way, because my personal belief is that social media is very shallow. You have 5,000 Facebook friends and 2 people you actually talk to.
Right.
And you throw out comments on social media and it gives people a false sense of power and a false sense of how many people they're actually reaching. And the only way we're going to come to a resolution is through human-to-human contact. So I'm a final year medical student at Wits. And when I practice as a doctor one day, I want people to look at me not as a white person or as a Jewish person, but as somebody, a person who is there to help them. And I'd like them to look at my clinical partner not as a Zambian or as a foreigner or someone they feel xenophobia towards, but as a doctor. So I think we need to interact with each other, and I think these interactions at school, in multiracial families, in wider South African society are crucial. And I think in South Africa, language is a bit of a barrier that sometimes excludes people from different racial interactions. But I think we need to push past that and interact on a person-to-person level. Because if we're just throwing out comments on social media and hunting each other down in a witch hunt, we're never going to get rid of this disease of racism.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to come back to you, of course, engage more with you, audience members. Thank you for those comments. And now let's take a short break. But when we come back, I'd like to hear more from my panelists about way forward. Do they really think young people have what it takes to end racism in South Africa? You're watching Sunday Live. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're tuned into Sunday Live right here on SABC 1. We're almost at the end of our show. We're talking about racism and whether or not you think that young people have what it takes to end racism in South Africa. And I'm going to reveal, of course, the results a little bit later on before we close the show. But for now, let's head back to our audience members. Welcome back. Your comments, please, sir.
Hi, my name is Sia Kumalo. I write and I blog about religion, politics, and sex. And I have found that a lot of white people are very reluctant to talk about whiteness and white privilege. But the problem is they don't have a choice, because I really believe we're headed towards a situation where white people will unpack whiteness or they will be confronted physically. And I don't say that to scare anybody. I don't say that out of animosity. I just think that that bubble a lot of them think they are safe in is not as safe as they feel it is. And they need to start talking fast. I really believe this. Thank you.
You so much. Now, Ayabong, as you take the mic there, I need to also ask you, as you answer, please, briefly, I've seen you comment a lot on social media around, you know, who is racist, whether or not black people have what it takes to even have the luxury of being racist. Please, in your comment, may you answer that as well?
I think the issue here is how we define racism. If we are going to restrict the definition of racism to prejudice, interpersonal prejudice, and then say, you know, racism is just perpetrated by a few bad apples and everyone else in the entire South Africa, there's a harmonious relationship between races, then I think we're misdiagnosing the issue. We've had a discussion here for close to 30 minutes, and no one's ever spoken about what is it that we're fighting against when we talk about racism. No one's spoken about white supremacy and the materiality of white supremacy. So it's not about a few bad apples, a few people going out on public and social media actually
calling each other monkeys.
But it's actually about a society which structures, you know, relations between people, socialization, and the political economy in a kind of way which entrenches white supremacy and also in many ways entrenches particular kinds of notions of black inferiority. And until you deal with that system, then, you know, the prejudicial acts that we're going to be hobnobbing from rates in 2008 to the University of Free State, that wasn't enough, and now we need Penny Sparrow to actually wake us again. So I think until you deal with the structure, you're not going anywhere.
All righty then. Well, let me take it back to Cape Town. Russell, before we say goodbye to you in our Cape Town studios, now we understand, actually we do know for a fact that just this past weekend, this past couple of days, Gareth Cliff has been in the spotlight with, you know, his legal battle with Mnate regarding his response to Penny Sparrow, as well as going back, of course, being one of the judges to the, you know, the Idols competition. Now, what can you summarize there for us in terms of recommendations moving forward, as also in using social media?
Yeah, so on the other side of the spectrum, where, you know, racism is offensive and it's something that none of us as South Africans should tolerate and should be dealt with in the swiftest terms. However, on the other side of the coin, calling someone a racist and kind of whipping up mass hysteria, mass media, commenting that someone is a racist has incredibly damaging effects. And the court was quite interesting in dealing with it. Basically, Mnet said that Gareth Cliff's tweet, which he basically said was people don't understand how freedom of speech works. It was not racist in itself, but it was insensitive to what happened in the past. And the court found that what it came out in papers, Mnet's counsel basically said that they felt they had to sack Gareth Cliff because he became the poster boy of racism. And another issue which was very concerning was in Cape Town recently, a fashion editor of Fair Lady magazine put out a tweet saying they were looking for a 1-week unpaid internship at a fashion magazine, and this is industry standard. And the response this lady got was almost victimization, where she was branded racist. And the label of that is very difficult and damaging, because on the other side of the coin, calling someone a racist is equivalent to a death sentence. And I think as South Africans going forward, you know, there are a lot of innocent people who don't want to hold on to that label.
Thank you so much, Russell, for your comment. Thank you so much for joining us right here on Sunday Live. And before I get our parting shots from our in Johannesburg studios, let's take a look at the poll results. I asked you, do you think young people have what it takes to end racism in the country? And it's very interesting that from our voters, 90% voted no. You can see that red block just going up, shooting up, and then 10% voted yes. Briefly, please, what do you think, Robin?
Well, in our experience, when people say that their children are colorblind, the fact is, unless you are colorblind, your children will not be colorblind. So the way that we raise our children will determine how we're going to go forward as a nation. And I feel very strongly that those of us who have experienced the past, who know the pain, who know the hurt, we need to tell our stories. It's not good enough for youngsters to say, well, we weren't there, we weren't defined by that, because yes, we're all defined by that. And so my job as a mom is to make sure those conversations happen.
All righty, then. Thank you so much, Robin. Pete, shocked by the results or not?
I'm not. I think young people do not necessarily have the capacity to fight racism and white supremacy. For all of us to actually successfully deal with that, we need to deal with the structural settings within which white supremacy drives itself and survives, which is the economy. If you don't deracialize the economy and make sure that it's not exclusively enjoyed by white people, you're not going to deal with racism, because if the structural settings are still favoring white people, and if poverty and unemployment are still synonymous with black, then you're not going to deal with white supremacy, because those are the key things that make people like Penny Sparrow have that kind of arrogance, where a random white person can have the guts to define black people as monkeys. It's because in terms of the structural power relations, the economy, she feels she's superior. And because those structural things have not been dealt with by the government and other people and all of us, we're not going to deal with that. We'll keep on talking about the symptoms of racism, which is whether or not somebody has been called a kafir. We need to deal with the economy, deracialize the economy, deal with the structural institutions, which defines a white supremacy, and from which superior and inferior complexes are derived. You need to deal with that.
Thank you so much, Peter Mpedi, senior political journalist. Thank you for joining us. Robin Forster, an adoptive mother, thank you so much for your time this evening. Russell Luck, of course, an attorney, technology attorney in our Cape Town studios. Thank you so much for your input in our conversation this evening. Thank you so much to our audience members for coming and engaging with us on this topic. I wish we had more time, but thank you for your valid contribution. And most importantly, thanks to you at home for joining in the conversation and voting on our poll question. That's all the time that we had for you right here on Sunday Live. I'm your host, Dumelo Mototwane. Until next Sunday, it's a good night.